Fans thought they had seen everything from Johnny Depp, but his latest appearance quietly changed the conversation overnight. Something felt different, and people online couldn't stop pointing it out. Was it his look, his energy, or something deeper that hints at a massive comeback? Even comments under recent public footage and verified interview clips started connecting the dots. In a recent appearance backed by documented press coverage and interview references, fans noticed a detail no one expected. This isn't just another sighting. This might be the moment everything shifts again. The moment Johnny Depp stepped into the recent public appearance, something instantly felt different and people picked up on it without anyone needing to say a word. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was there, and fans who have followed his journey for years noticed it within seconds. The way he carried himself, the calm in his expressions, the control in his body language, it all signaled a shift that didn't match the narrative people had grown used to. This wasn't the same version of him the media had been circulating for years, and the contrast is exactly what sparked the conversation online. Clips from the appearance started circulating quickly, especially short verified footage from press interactions and red carpet moments, and what stood out most was consistency. Not just one good angle or one lucky moment, but multiple clips from different sources showing the same composed, confident presence. In one widely discussed interview segment that was published through recognized entertainment outlets, his tone was measured, his responses were clear, and there was no sign of the hesitation people had previously pointed out. This detail alone made fans pause and ask a bigger question: what changed? For a long time, public perception around him had been shaped by controversy, headlines, and selective moments that painted a certain picture. But in this latest appearance, fans noticed something that didn't align with that image anymore. His energy felt grounded, almost calculated in a way that suggested control rather than chaos. People started commenting on how he seemed more present, more aware, and most importantly more intentional with every movement and every word. What really caught attention was how this shift wasn't forced. It didn't feel like a performance designed to win people back. Instead, it came across as natural, which made it even more powerful. Viewers who compared this appearance to past public events pointed out a clear difference in posture, eye contact, and pacing. These are subtle things, but when they change all at once, they tell a bigger story. And that story is what fans started piecing together. Another key detail that people couldn't ignore was his interaction with the crowd and media. In verified footage from the event, he took time to acknowledge fans in a way that felt genuine rather than routine. There was a moment captured by multiple outlets where he paused, made eye contact, and responded with a slight smile that didn't feel rehearsed. Small moments like this often go unnoticed, but this time they became the center of discussion because they reflected something deeper, a sense of comfort that hadn't been visible before. Online discussions began connecting this appearance to his recent professional moves as well. Industry insiders and entertainment journalists have been referencing his gradual return to projects, supported by documented reports and confirmed interviews where he addressed his work rather than controversy. In one such interview, he focused on creativity, storytelling, and the process behind his roles instead of reacting to past narratives. This shift in focus is important because it shows where his priorities are now, and fans picked up on that immediately. People also noticed how his style and presentation had evolved. It wasn't about expensive outfits or dramatic changes, but rather a refined simplicity that aligned with his overall presence. Everything looked intentional without trying too hard, which added to the impression that this was a reset rather than a reaction. When public figures make a comeback, it's often loud and heavily promoted, but this felt different. It felt like a quiet rebuild that had been happening behind the scenes. What makes this moment even more significant is the timing. After years of being at the center of intense public scrutiny, showing up in a way that feels controlled and authentic sends a strong message without needing to say anything directly. And that's exactly why fans are calling this his biggest comeback yet, not because of a single event, but because of what that event represents. The conversation quickly moved beyond just his appearance and into what this could mean for the future. People started speculating about upcoming projects, potential collaborations, and how the industry might respond to this version of him. But what stood out most was the shift in tone. Instead of doubt or criticism, the majority of reactions leaned toward curiosity and cautious optimism. That alone marks a major change from previous years. Another layer to this discussion comes from the way media coverage has started to evolve. While headlines still vary, there has been a noticeable increase in balanced reporting that focuses on verified facts and documented interviews rather than speculation. This change in coverage plays a role in shaping public perception, and when combined with his recent appearance, it creates a narrative that feels more grounded in reality. Fans who revisited older clips and interviews began pointing out the contrast more clearly. They highlighted how his communication style has become more focused, how his presence feels less reactive and more composed. These observations are based on real footage and documented interactions, which adds credibility to the conversation rather than making it purely opinion-based. And then there's the detail that sparked the most discussion, the one thing fans kept repeating across platforms. It wasn't just that he looked better or seemed calmer, it was that he appeared in control of his narrative again. For a long time, that control seemed lost, with external voices shaping the story. But in this moment, through his actions and presence, it felt like he had taken the control back. This is where everything starts to connect, because a comeback isn't just about returning to the spotlight, it's about changing how people see you when you get there. And based on this appearance, that change is already happening. People aren't just watching anymore, they're re-evaluating everything they thought they knew, and the shift in perception is where the real comeback begins. And the shift in perception is where things start building momentum in a way that doesn't rely on hype but on observation. People weren't being told to support Johnny Depp again, they were choosing to look closer on their own, and that makes a huge difference. When an audience starts analyzing details without being pushed, it usually means something genuine is happening. That's exactly what unfolded after this appearance, as more clips surfaced and more verified sources began covering the same consistent behavior. One of the most talked about elements was his voice and how steady it sounded compared to older interviews that fans revisited for comparison. In a recent recorded interaction published by established media outlets, his responses were not rushed, not defensive, and not overly rehearsed. Instead, there was a controlled rhythm in the way he spoke, almost like someone who had taken time to reflect and rebuild internally before stepping back into the public eye. This wasn't speculation, this was something people could directly observe in documented footage, which made the conversation stronger and more grounded. Another important detail came from how he handled questions that could have easily shifted the tone of the interaction. Rather than redirecting awkwardly or avoiding eye contact, he maintained composure and kept the focus on his work and creative process. This aligns with statements he has made in past verified interviews where he emphasized storytelling and artistic expression as his main priorities. Fans connected these dots quickly, realizing that this wasn't a one-time moment but part of a larger pattern. What made everything even more interesting was how different audiences reacted. Longtime supporters felt validated in their belief that he would eventually regain control of his image, while neutral viewers who had stayed away from the discussion started engaging again with a fresh perspective. Even critics, while still cautious, acknowledged that this version of him was noticeably different from what they had seen before. That kind of cross-audience reaction doesn't happen easily, and it usually indicates a real shift rather than a temporary impression. The visual details also played a role in reinforcing this narrative. Fans pointed out how his expressions seemed more relaxed, how his movements were more deliberate, and how there was a sense of balance in the way he interacted with both media and fans. These are subtle cues, but when they appear consistently across multiple verified clips, they become hard to ignore. People began sharing side-by-side comparisons, not to prove a point aggressively but to understand the change more clearly. At the same time, industry conversations started picking up quietly in the background. Entertainment journalists and insiders referenced his recent and upcoming work in a tone that felt more focused on the projects themselves rather than past controversies. This shift in industry dialogue is important because it reflects how professionals within the field are starting to re-engage with him on a creative level. And when that happens, it often signals opportunities that go beyond public appearances. There's also the element of timing again, because this didn't happen immediately after any major headline or event. It came after a period of relative quiet, which suggests that whatever changes people are noticing didn't happen overnight. This feels more like a gradual rebuild that reached a visible point in this appearance. Fans who paid attention to his journey over time recognized that progression, and it added depth to their interpretation of the moment. Another layer that added credibility to the discussion was the presence of photographers and journalists who documented the event from different angles and perspectives. When multiple independent sources capture the same consistent behavior, it reduces the chances of misinterpretation. In this case, whether it was red carpet footage, interview segments, or candid moments, the overall impression remained the same: calm, controlled, and confident without being excessive. What really pushed the conversation further was how quickly people started connecting this appearance to the idea of a comeback rather than just a good day. A single appearance doesn't usually change public perception this strongly unless it represents something bigger. And that's what fans believed they were seeing, not just a moment, but a turning point. The word comeback started appearing more frequently in discussions, not as hype but as a conclusion drawn from observable details. There were also references to his recent work and collaborations that had already been confirmed through official announcements and interviews. Fans began revisiting those announcements with a new level of interest, now viewing them through the lens of this appearance. Suddenly, those projects felt more significant, as if they were part of a larger plan rather than isolated efforts. This kind of retrospective attention often happens when a public figure re-establishes credibility in the eyes of the audience. Another key factor was how he avoided overexposure. Instead of appearing everywhere at once or engaging in excessive promotion, this appearance stood out precisely because it felt measured. That restraint added to the authenticity of the moment, making it feel less like a strategy and more like a natural step forward. In an environment where constant visibility is often mistaken for relevance, this approach felt refreshing and intentional. Fans also paid attention to how he responded non-verbally, something that is often overlooked but incredibly telling. The way he listened, the pauses before responding, the slight nods, all of these details contributed to the overall impression of someone who is fully present. These aren't things that can be easily scripted or faked, especially across multiple interactions captured on camera. And that's why they resonated so strongly with viewers. As the conversation continued to grow, more people who hadn't initially paid attention started watching the clips themselves. This created a ripple effect where the discussion expanded beyond core fan communities into a broader audience. And interestingly, many of these new viewers came to similar conclusions without being influenced by previous opinions. They saw the same calm, the same control, and the same shift that others had already pointed out. This is where the narrative starts becoming more than just observation, it becomes recognition. Recognition that something has changed in a way that feels real and sustainable. Not perfect, not dramatic, but consistent. And in today's fast-moving media environment, consistency is often more powerful than intensity. All of these elements combined create a picture that is hard to dismiss. From verified interviews to documented footage, from audience reactions to industry conversations, everything points toward the same conclusion. This isn't just a temporary moment of positive attention, it's the beginning of a repositioning that has been building quietly and is now becoming visible. And as more people continue to analyze and discuss this appearance, one thing becomes increasingly clear: this wasn't accidental. Every detail, from his demeanor to his communication, reflects a level of awareness that suggests preparation and intention. Not in a forced or artificial way, but in a way that shows he understands exactly how he wants to be seen moving forward. And the realization is what keeps the conversation going, because if this is the new version people are seeing, then the next question becomes unavoidable: what happens next and how far can this momentum actually go? And how far this momentum can actually go is exactly what started pulling even more attention toward every small move Johnny Depp made after that appearance. People weren't just watching anymore, they were tracking patterns. Every new clip, every interaction, every confirmed report was being looked at through a different lens now. Not with the expectation of failure, but with curiosity about consistency. And the shift alone changes everything, because when the audience starts looking for growth instead of flaws, the entire narrative begins to evolve. One of the most interesting developments came from how quickly older assumptions started losing weight. Clips that once shaped public opinion were being re-evaluated side by side with current footage, and the contrast was becoming harder to ignore. This wasn't about rewriting the past, it was about recognizing the difference in the present. In multiple verified interviews and press interactions that followed, his tone remained steady, his focus remained on work, and most importantly his reactions stayed controlled even in unpredictable moments. Consistency like that doesn't happen by accident, and fans knew it. There was also a noticeable shift in how conversations about him were framed across media platforms. Instead of leading with controversy, more coverage began focusing on craft, upcoming work, and creative direction. Entertainment outlets that had access to his recent appearances highlighted his professionalism and engagement rather than pulling attention toward old narratives. This kind of shift in framing doesn't just happen randomly. It usually reflects what journalists and insiders are actually observing in real time. Another layer that fans picked up on was the way he seemed more connected to his work than ever before. In a documented interview segment that circulated widely, he spoke about his approach to roles with a level of detail and clarity that stood out. There was no distraction in his delivery, no attempt to redirect the conversation toward anything else. He stayed on topic, broke down his creative process, and gave insights that felt genuine rather than rehearsed. This is important because it reinforces the idea that his focus has shifted back to what originally defined his career. People also began noticing how those around him responded differently. Whether it was interviewers, photographers, or other industry figures, there was a level of ease in their interactions that hadn't been present before. Conversations flowed more naturally, questions were more focused, and the overall tone felt less tense. When the environment around someone changes like that, it often reflects a broader shift in perception that goes beyond just one individual. The audience reaction continued to evolve as well. Comments that once carried doubt started being replaced with observations and analysis. Instead of quick judgments, People were taking time to explain what they noticed and why it mattered. This deeper level of engagement shows that viewers weren't just reacting emotionally, they were actively processing what they were seeing. And when an audience reaches that level of attention, it usually means something significant is happening. Another detail that became impossible to ignore was how natural everything felt across different situations. Whether it was a formal interview, a public event, or a candid moment captured on camera, the same version of him showed up every time. There was no visible switch between personas, no sudden change in energy depending on the setting. That kind of consistency builds trust because it suggests authenticity rather than performance. At the same time, discussions about his upcoming work started gaining more traction. Projects that had already been confirmed through official announcements and credible reports were now being talked about with renewed interest. People weren't just curious about the projects themselves, they were curious about how this new presence would translate on screen. And the curiosity is a key indicator of a comeback because it shows that the audience is ready to engage again on a professional level. There was also a growing sense that this wasn't just about returning, it was about redefining. Instead of trying to recreate past success, everything pointed toward a more refined and controlled approach moving forward. Fans who had followed his earlier career noted that while certain elements of his personality were still there, they were now balanced with a level of awareness that hadn't been as visible before. This combination of familiarity and growth is what makes a comeback sustainable rather than temporary. Another factor that added weight to this narrative was how little he needed to say directly about it. There were no bold declarations, no dramatic statements about change or redemption. Instead, everything was communicated through actions, through presence, and through consistency across verified appearances and interviews. This approach made the shift feel more believable because it wasn't being forced onto the audience, it was being shown to them. As more footage and reports continued to surface, the conversation began reaching audiences who had previously ignored or avoided the topic altogether. These viewers came in without strong opinions, and many of them arrived at the same conclusion after watching the same clips. They noticed the control, the calm, and the clarity in his interactions. When people from different perspectives start agreeing on the same observation, it strengthens the overall narrative significantly. There's also the psychological aspect of it, where people are naturally drawn to transformation stories. But what makes this situation different is that the transformation isn't being told through words, it's being demonstrated through behavior. And because of that, it feels less like a story being sold and more like a reality unfolding in real time. That distinction is crucial because it determines whether the audience stays engaged or loses interest. Another important observation came from how he handled attention itself. Instead of reacting to the increased focus or trying to capitalize on it immediately, he maintained the same measured approach. This restraint added another layer of authenticity to the situation because it showed that the focus wasn't on short-term validation but on long-term positioning. In an industry where quick reactions are common, this level of patience stands out. All of these elements continued to build on each other, creating a momentum that felt organic rather than manufactured. From the initial appearance to the follow-up interactions, everything aligned in a way that reinforced the same message without repeating it directly. And the message was simple but powerful: something has changed, and it's not temporary. And as this realization spread, the conversation naturally shifted toward what this means moving forward. Not just in terms of projects or appearances, but in terms of how he will be perceived from this point on. Because once an audience starts seeing someone differently, it becomes very difficult to reverse that perception unless something breaks the pattern. Right now, that pattern remains intact, and every new appearance adds another layer to it. People are no longer waiting for confirmation, they're watching for continuation. They want to see if this consistency holds, if this presence remains the same across different situations and over time. And so far, everything suggests that it will. Which brings everything back to the original moment that started it all, because what fans noticed wasn't just a detail, it was a signal. A signal that something had shifted internally and was now visible externally. And when that kind of shift happens, it doesn't just change how someone is seen in the present, it reshapes expectations for the future. It reshapes expectations for the future in a way that slowly starts influencing decisions beyond just public perception. And that's where the impact becomes even more real for Johnny Depp. Because once the audience begins to accept a new version, the industry eventually follows, and signs of the shift have already started appearing in subtle but important ways. Conversations that were once hesitant are now becoming more open, and opportunities that seemed unlikely before are quietly moving back into the picture. One of the clearest indicators of this change is how professionals within the industry have started referencing him again in discussions related to craft and performance. Instead of being associated primarily with past controversy, his name is gradually being reconnected with his work. This isn't speculation, it's reflected in how recent interviews, press mentions, and documented reports are framing him. When journalists begin focusing on skill and contribution rather than narrative, it signals a broader shift that goes beyond fan perception. Another detail that stands out is how his presence is influencing the tone of interactions around him. Whether it's during interviews, public events, or even candid moments captured by photographers, there is a noticeable sense of stability that carries through each setting. People engaging with him seem more at ease, conversations feel less guarded, and the overall dynamic appears more natural. This kind of environment doesn't just happen randomly, it usually develops when there's a level of trust being rebuilt over time. Fans have also continued to track how consistent this version of him remains across different situations. They've pointed out that whether he's speaking about his work, acknowledging supporters, or simply moving through public space, the same calm and controlled demeanor is present. This repetition is important because it confirms that what they noticed initially wasn't a one-time moment, it's a pattern that's holding steady. There's also growing attention around how this shift is affecting interest in his future projects. Discussions that once centered around uncertainty are now leaning toward anticipation. People are beginning to ask what kind of roles he will choose, how he will approach them, and how this renewed presence will translate into performance. This level of curiosity is a strong indicator that the audience is ready to re-engage not just with the person, but with the work itself. At the same time, there's an understanding that a comeback isn't defined by one appearance or even a series of appearances, but by sustainability. And that's exactly what people are watching for now. They're not just reacting to what they've already seen, they're observing what happens next. Every new interview, every public moment, every confirmed update becomes part of a larger picture that is still forming. Another layer to this evolving narrative is how he seems to be navigating attention differently than before. Instead of reacting to every conversation or trying to control every headline, there is a noticeable sense of selectiveness in where and how he appears. This measured approach suggests a level of awareness that aligns with the overall shift fans have been pointing at. It's not about being everywhere, it's about being present in the right moments. People have also started discussing the idea that this comeback feels earned rather than engineered. It doesn't rely on dramatic announcements or sudden changes designed to capture attention. Instead, it's built on observable behavior that has remained consistent over time. That's what makes it resonate more deeply with audiences, because it feels real rather than constructed. Another important observation comes from how new audiences are reacting. Individuals who may not have followed his journey closely before are now encountering this version of him without the weight of past narratives. And many of them are forming impressions based solely on what they see now, which in many cases aligns with what longtime fans have been pointing at. This convergence of perspectives adds strength to the overall shift in perception. There's also the element of timing once again, because this moment is happening in a media landscape that moves quickly and often forgets just as fast. For a shift like this to hold attention, it needs to be backed by consistency and reinforced by action. So far, that's exactly what has been happening, and it's why the conversation hasn't faded as quickly as some expected. What makes this situation even more compelling is how it challenges the usual pattern of public comebacks. Instead of a loud return followed by a gradual decline in attention, this has been the opposite. A quiet re-entry followed by growing interest and deeper engagement. That reversal makes people pay closer attention because it doesn't follow the script they're used to seeing. As more time passes, the initial surprise is being replaced by recognition. Recognition that this isn't just a temporary phase, but potentially a new baseline. And once that baseline is established, it becomes the standard against which future appearances will be measured. So far, that standard has remained consistent, and that consistency is what continues to build momentum. Fans are now looking ahead, not just to see if this continues, but to understand how far it can go. Will this translate into major projects, critical recognition, or a full reintegration into the highest levels of the industry? Those questions are still open, but what's clear is that the foundation for those possibilities is being rebuilt right now. And it all connects back to that initial detail fans noticed, the one that seemed small at first but carried a much bigger meaning. It wasn't just about appearance or behavior, it was about presence. A presence that felt grounded, intentional, and controlled in a way that hadn't been visible for a long time. That presence is now shaping everything that follows, influencing how people interpret each new moment and how they project what comes next. Because once an audience starts believing in a shift, they begin looking for proof of its continuation, and every consistent appearance strengthens the belief. Right now, all signs point in the same direction. The conversation is growing, the perception is evolving, and the momentum is holding. And if that continues, then what fans noticed in that one appearance won't just be remembered as a moment, it will be seen as the beginning of something much bigger. If you've watched this closely, then you already know this isn't just another moment, it actually feels like the beginning of something big. But now the real question is, do you think this is truly Johnny Depp's biggest comeback yet? Or is there still more he needs to prove? Drop your thoughts in the comments because your perspective matters more than ever right now. And if you want more real, honest breakdowns like this without hype or noise, make sure you stay connected and don't miss what's coming next.